Oh man. Hi. I will have you all know that on this lovely Tuesday, I am skipping a GSAS meeting. We actually have one of the speakers who's going to be at Keystone Clash is at my club tonight, and I'm mostly skipping my club meeting just because I don't want to risk getting sick right before the clash. I'm perfectly honest, um, not that I think there's a huge risk going to my club meeting. It's like a total just in case. Because I don't want to be like, right before I need to do two talks, a panel talk, and fly, end up sick. That would suck. Simone Barkeep, what's up, buddy? So, tonight's going to be like super super chill. I can English, I promise. I was reading chat and was trying to speak at the same time. It's a bad idea. It's a bad idea. My brain is not ready for that right now. Yeah, Stephen P. It's Murphy's Law. That would totally be a Murphy's Law type thing. Be like, I'm about to go to a convention. I might as well go to my fish club meeting. Immediately get sick. Like, ugh. Oh man. So, uh, here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna talk about a couple things I've done in the past as far as filming is concerned, and then kind of go back and get that information from you guys, what your ideas are, because I'm curious if like the same stuff I've done in the past is still fun or not. Oh, Liquid Zoo only, Fins. Just finished installing a Tesla wall charger in time. I actually just used the little at home, that is, the little 110 basic plug charger. It's super slow. But when I'm not driving a ton, it's perfectly fine. I can usually do a few errands throughout the week and then have plenty of charge over that time produced for the weekend, so I could do larger driving trips. Like last weekend, I went out with a friend. We went to this event at the Woodinville Whiskey Company where they had a special harvest release that came out. So we got to taste some of it, pick up it if we wanted it. We picked up some for some friends. And then we went around to a bunch of other places and did other dumb idiot stuff. Well, I had plenty of charge to do that, and by the time I got home, just plugged it back in, and by the next day, I had enough charge to easily go run my errands and not have to worry about being too low on battery. So it works for me, but if you drive a lot, yeah, you want the better charger for certain. And eventually, I'll probably build one of those at my house, but yeah, too lazy to do that now. Okay, so let me let me talk about some of the stuff I've done in the past, and we'll start at I guess AGA 2019, right? I didn't film a ton at AGA, but what I did film was kind of I did a thing with Gary Lang, right? I did a thing with a couple of different YouTubers. That's where I started the whole uh the YouTuber Dream Tank type thing that I've done in the past, where it's if I were to give you a X tank, I think I did 100 gallon and 150 gallon. So I did bigger tanks, right? As a display where you get all of the equipment and you get everything paid for. What's the first fish you want to put in there in that tank? So kind of a thing to get an idea of if somebody was provided this display tank, basically, where they don't have to worry about effectively anything, what would they choose to purchase? And also, with some limitations by not being okay, it's an 800-gallon giant monstrosity, so you can do anything under the sun, like stingrays or something, right? It's still keeping it reasonable, but more of a large display tank that you or I could, in theory, have in our home, right? And I did that. I did a similar version of that at Triple Crown, but the caveat was you were only allowed to have one fish in the tank, period. And one fish being one species, not a singular fish, but just like this tank was going to be a display, a species only tank, what would you put in it? So we saw some like interesting stuff out of that. And I think in general that has been relatively well received because there's been different creators at each event, so you got to see different people talk about what interests them. Um, and then from there, like I've always done a more retrospective video where I talk about my experience there, whether or not I think it's worth going to that particular event, and like would I go back to that event in the future as an example. So that's kind of like historically what I've done. I'm trying to think if there's any other. I did do like an interview at Triple Crown where it was with talking about unkuli, which is the little kind of like hooks almost that are built into plecostomus mouths for the suckerfish type varieties, which is to say mostly your more hard rasping ones as opposed to necessarily some of your more carnivorous. And that was interesting from a pure educational standpoint. So, that's kind of like what we've done in the past. So this is where like chat, feel free. I'd love to hear your ideas of like what would be interesting to you. Would you want to keep on that role? Definitely in the case of Keystone Clash, right? Like there's things to film. Like, when I was at Triple Crown, we did like a little bit about Rusty Wessel's place and kind of some of the fish featured in the tank show that were at the Triple Crown. I did some of that kind of stuff. Talked a little bit about like the auction as a part of like the whole experience that's going on. But keep in mind, like I'm only there a few days. I have to do 2 talks in a panel chat and maybe something else. So I'm not sure exactly how much dedicated filming I can get in, but it's kind of a, do you guys like that stuff, or is there something that maybe I'm not covering that's interesting? So Nabokov fan says, an alternate question on theme. You have unlimited funds to go anywhere in the world, but it has to be fish related. What would you do? I think that's a cool question, right? For those who like, it gets an idea of if you were to get an opportunity to go like kind of wild collecting or something like that, what would be the thing they would want to do? I think that's cool because I think there are people who will, if you leave it more open-ended like that and not purely wild collecting, I think you would find people who would want to go to like, say, the ADA headquarters in Japan, right? Or maybe you'd want to go to Green Aqua, some of these places that are not necessarily local to us in the United States, but you'd still be interested. Or maybe you want to go down to the Amazon Research Center, hang out with Dr. Mazerall and like check out all the awesome things that they do there, right? As opposed to necessarily purely wild collecting. Although I think most fish keepers are probably going to want to go wild collecting, because who doesn't casually dream of collecting fish from the wild and taking them home and putting them in their tank, huh? Lots of football talk. See that? Probably have a bit of my personal depression if we talk football. I saw this comment at the start from Stephen P, and I have to say, a serious hardcore YouTuber would film everything, and then also stage stuff that wouldn't have happened and claim it happened, and film that too. Oh man, that's a good thing I'm not a hardcore YouTuber. Because I often, like, when I go to events, unless I'm forcing myself to get a lot of filming in, I film kind of minimally because I want to experience the event more and not just like lose myself in being worried about YouTube content, and do things more retrospectively. However, there's certainly a need to like have some footage from the event because it does help. And I think when I get those opportunities to interface with people I haven't met before, it's super fun to just sit down and do kind of like short, fun fish related stuff with whether it's other creators or maybe even like fans. That's the other thing I haven't done is I haven't done necessarily fans before. because creators inherently like we like putting ourselves on camera where fans might not necessarily want to. But that might be another angle too, is like sit down with folks that aren't creators who are just people that we know, whether you're in chat and live streams, you're the replay crew, whatever it may be. That could be interesting. That could be an interesting twist too. Sid Miller, wear a motorcycle helmet with a GoPro on it for the whole show. Sadly, GoPros like have really limited battery, but interesting idea, like the constant, uh, the Bentley view, if you will. Hot seat, big style. Well, we've kind of done. I kind of did a little bit of a hot seat at Triple Crown, and that was fun. Although it was much different with Biggs. Like Biggs, just you can't control that man. Oh man. Oh man. Things I would personally be interested in seeing from Nabokov fans. Seeing the speaker talks, especially the one from Bentley. Yeah, so I will definitely record my talks. Similar to like when I did a talk at Fishtoberfest. That'll be recorded. Both my talks will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube. So don't worry about that. I kind of have a goal, which is also why I try to always do not necessarily a new talk, but a variation on a talk if I'm asked to talk anywhere. So like if I get asked to talk about plants at 5 different places, I'm going to try and do little variations on it so that there's hopefully something new and fun every time. So that if for some reason you did see me like at the GSAS and you went down to the Portland Aquarium Society and saw the same talk, it would be a little different and a little more little interesting, maybe get some nugget of information. And then also when it's up to YouTube, it's not just like, it's just Bentley's talk on plants, right? It's trying to make it a little special every time. So like as an example, I have a plant talk for Keystone Clash that is called Finding Balance, which is basically like how to make planet tanks easy. And in that talk, like I've done longer plant talks than this one. This is going to be slightly shorter. I think my goal is about 45 minutes. Hopefully I can keep it down 45 minutes or less. But basically talking about how we actually like balance out the key things in like kind of like the Triforce of power, if you will. The 3 things that matter most, which is nutrients, light, and I would argue carbon realistically is actually the 3rd. Most people tend to look at like substrate. I'm kind of omitting substrate, and you'll see that in the talk. So look forward to that if you guys want more of my random psychosis on plants. And then my second talk is kind of more in the line of how I fell in love with a fish that farts, which is all about dojo loaches. And this one instead will be about rainbow fish, which is entitled Beautiful Idiots. And it's a journey of rainbow fish. And basically I want to kind of have a semi-humorous way to give the basics on kind of how I learned about rainbow fish through things that were either failures or things that made me paranoid. Just, the things of like, if you haven't kept rainbow fish before, things that you will see when you start keeping rainbow fish that will scare you, make you think some horrible disease has happened, etc., that, I had in my journey. And in hindsight, when I look back at them, I think they're very funny, and I'm hoping I can make them entertaining in a talk as well, by also teaching like the basics of rainbow fish while having a few good laughs. But yeah, I certainly want to talk to folks like Dan, and potentially some of the other speakers. Maybe they'll let me film. I don't know if they're going to let me film the panel chat. I hope so. I would assume I could just set a camera up and call it a day. I'll have to ask probably all of the appropriate speakers, because they're all YouTubers in some way, shape, or form, at the Q&A on rainbow fish. But just for those things, for the bigger things, the talks and stuff, absolutely going to film those. It's more of like some of the side stuff that can be filmed. It's like, do you want a tour of the convention? because I could film just a tour of the convention, and just kind of like what's there, what makes the Clash interesting and fun compared to, say, ACA or the Live Bearers or Cataclysm, right? What makes it different than Aquashella, which is enormous and huge, or it makes it different than coming out to Fishtoberfest, right? I think those are other things that can be filmed. I don't want to say easily, but more like that are kind of the more straightforward parts that you could do, as opposed to maybe some of the more like obscure, silly things that I like to do when I'm at conventions. It's just kind of like I want to see, because not as many people, we see tons of creators go to Aquashella as an example, but we don't necessarily see like a million videos on Keystone Clash like we would Aquashella. So the question is like, what stuff from Keystone Clash would you guys like to see, especially because it's my first Keystone Clash, right? I've never been to the Clash. I mean, to be fair, almost every fish convention I've probably never been to, except Fishtoberfest. It's the only one I regularly go to because it's close. But yeah, you may need a camera crew from Adam's Electric Universe. No, I don't get a camera crew. I just get my dumb butt running around with a camera. I do have multiple cameras if I really had to go crazy, but it's probably easier to just have a camera, and yeah. But yeah, it might be interesting just to kind of go over some of the things that I do at a convention, which is to say mostly just sit around and talk with people, because I'm super social and I like talking with people. What can you do? What can you do? Just gotta chatter. Obviously I sit here and chatter all the time. What else we got? Oh man, Kelly, you're doing 2 panel chats? I know you're doing 2 talks. Kelly, are you filming your talks? I'm super curious if you're going to film them and then put them up on your channel. Hopefully you've got like a camera or something you could take with you to record them. Or maybe you'll just do a different version at your normal setup at home. Nabokov fan, do you know anything about Andreas Tonke? First time I've heard of the speaker, but both really into cool fish. So, okay. I'll give you this. I'll give you the intro from my club, because I think it's actually a really good intro for him. So one of the things is he's from north central Germany, so the northern part of central Germany. So that's part of the reasons why you might not know him as well in the United States, is because he's mostly a European speaker, but he's been an author, a publisher, and a speaker. He tends to do a lot of South American, like plecos and dwarf cichlids tend to be his specialties. If you wanted to be more technical, his main topic is ichthyofauna. Yeah, fancy words, right? But just fish-related biodiversity, things like that. But he's been in a number of different societies. He's traveled all over the place. Lots of South America, so like portions of Peru, Suriname, Brazil, Venezuela. And then he was giving 2 different talks to our club. One is the plecos of Amazonia, and then his main one is that the ichthyofauna of South America. But he's just like, he's a really, really cool German speaker who specializes mostly in dwarf cichlids and plecostomuses. Right, he's a big pleco and dwarf cichlid guy, so a lot of your South American, Amazonian type fish, which there's a lot of people who are into that, but he's got a really, really in-depth background and a big focus on those dwarf cichlids, so like your pistogrammas and things like that. And then, of course, who doesn't love a pleco, right? Plecos are awesome. But yeah, that's the big thing. I think most people might not necessarily know him is because he's from Germany, so there's not as much exposure to the United States. He was actually doing this huge kind of U.S. tour, so I think he was out here in the States for like a month or something like that, and he traveled to a number of different clubs because it was the first time all of these clubs kind of had an ability to get him to the United States, so several clubs kind of banded together and all put their money in place to make sure that he could travel to several of the different clubs and give talks. But yeah, I think that's maybe why like you might not know who he is. He's definitely well known in German fish keeping. All things fish. I'd be terrible at creating content at an event. I'd rather wander around and BS with folks. Honestly, that's mostly what I do, but I just happen to like BS with folks on camera. It's like it's surprisingly easy, you know, if you sit down and just talk with other creators. Often you can get ideas for a video like fairly quick, and most of us love doing some kind of like minor collaboration stuff. So like you could look at the silly like what I call you know, YouTuber Dream Tank type videos that I've done where I just talk to a number of different creators who are at an event and ask them a simple question like, if I present you with this tank, what are you putting in it? Right? And it's just a simple, fun thing. You can have fun. You get to know that person if you didn't know them before, because you're finding out about like something that interests them, and that teaches you more about like where their part of the hobby is, right? And that's always fun. But you know, it's what I like to do. I've got to dig through chat because I talk for too long, and then I get behind in the chat. Do you know anything about? Let's see. That was Andreas. Thank you. Sorry, Kingfisher Sketch. I moved 2 tanks this weekend. Drained 2/3, left the fish in, and hauled it 3 kilometers away. Filled it up, then saw my only Kawitawa male under a rock. Luckily, he's fine. Woo! That's a little scary. Yeah, that's a little scary. Observe what everyone else is filming and film the exact opposite. That's not a bad idea. I mean, it's interesting because a lot of us end up sitting and talking so much that we don't film as much as you might think. But everybody, you know, I think this isn't as big event as Aquashella, so who knows like what the creator sphere is going to be. Then there's those of us who are doing talks, right? Because like this will be my first time to meet, as an example, Primetime Aquatics in person, right? Primetime Aquatics is like the keynote speaker and the kind of the headline speaker. Was originally KG Tropicals, but something happened, so that sucks because I would have loved to meet John and Lisa, but still pretty excited because, you know, Jason's pretty awesome. Let's just be honest. Are you going to have a sack of rocks to demonstrate how smart rainbows are? It's not a bad idea. I do have some stuff prepped. I have to finish the last little bits of my rainbow talk in my panels. Mostly it's I need to get some videos and some photography inserted in that I have either in the depths of like various hard drives and or am going to be getting through this week. But yeah. They certainly are dumb. Yeah, by the way, if there are questions and you need them specifically at me, so like Beta Aquatics as an example, if I see that there were some questions, but I don't know if you were asking me or chat, at Bentley Pasco makes it super easy. This is going to be a pretty free-form night tonight, guys. I mostly just kind of off the cuff and not as topical, although, yeah, we're getting close. Sid Miller, new plan, live stream yourself and let the chat control you like Twitch plays Pokemon. No, that's definitely not happening. Definitely not happening. Mostly because, yeah, man, I like having control over my life. And, yeah, you know. Funny, though. Definitely funny. Kelly, I plan to create 0 content. Oh. Why? Now I'm going to have to record all your stuff, Kelly. Amazon Pancakes just recently picked up a Luteus Pleco Phase 2. What an amazing fish. So, I have seen, I think it's 7 Luteuses in person now. None have been more than Phase 2. And they're always like stunning. I think everyone I've seen in person is really, really cool to look at. You just need a giant tank, right? Because they do get some size on them. But man, they're such cool looking fish. Brian Radovich. Andreas spoke at the Great Salt Lake Aquarium Society last month. I was not able to attend. Hope someone tapes his stuff. Yeah, and I think part of it is right. Speakers like Andreas, it's you have to have permission. Like I know in the case of the talks he's doing for my club, we have them recorded so that members who couldn't attend can watch them, but they're not made publicly available. You have to be a member of the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society to be able to access them. And that's kind of a running agreement we have with most speakers, because for a lot of the speakers, their talks are desired, and there's a thought that if you put your talk on the internet, now no club is going to want to bring you in to do those. And for some of the speakers, like that's part of their fun is traveling around to other clubs and doing their talks so they can meet other people. And I get that to a point, but I work on the opposite philosophy because I think there's always something slightly different in any given talk, even if like you're giving the same talk, and I put this in quotation marks, there's always something different about like how you're responding to the audience or like some of the little memories or factoids that you decide to talk about that make each experience unique. And maybe it's just a question and answer session, right? Where if people have seen your talk ahead of time, they might come with more interesting questions to you as a speaker, as opposed to kind of trying to figure out a question off the cuff based on your presentation. Just my thoughts, but I get why a lot of speakers don't like their stuff being online or being available publicly. So in the case of Mr. Tanky, I think it would be a thing of like, if he gave someone permission to put his talk up, that would be cool. But I have a feeling it's probably a no, just because he's done this big tour of a bunch of clubs, and that's kind of what makes it special for the clubs as opposed to just free online content. And I don't know. It depends. I'll talk to him. Why not? But I also don't want to film every talk. Although that might be super useful, I feel like if that was going to happen, it would be something that the folks of the Clash should be doing. I'm still surprised, Kelly, you're doing zero content. Well, maybe I'll talk to you, see if you want me to film stuff for you. Because if all else fails, you can use my equipment. Bob Purcell, how do you feel about your birds after week 1? Depressed. Now, granted, for you fish folks, you can tune out for a few minutes. We'll be talking football for a moment. Our 2 tackles both suffered injuries and went out of the game, and then from there, our O-line turned into like a wet paper bag because who'd have thunk that the Rams still have some of the best pass rushers in the NFL? Namely, they have Aaron Donald, who is a nightmare. I was a little upset several times when we went for big chunk plays, despite the fact that at the time, Kenneth Walker hadn't had a single negative rush, and it was averaging about 5 yards a carry, and we were at like 3rd and 4, as an example. I feel like it would have been better to, instead of going for like a sideline throw, which we did a couple of times, run the ball. Also, the Rams offense was predictable, and we never changed. Our defense never changed its scheme. You could literally be like, sideline, sideline, middle of the field. Sideline, sideline, middle of the field. Middle of the field, sideline, sideline. Like, their pass options, they're all designed to work against zone, right? And we are still in a zone defense, and I don't know why, because we shouldn't be anymore, but I am not a professional football coach, so what do I know? I'm just some guy that was screaming at his television for like 2 hours as I watched my team be depressingly, embarrassingly bad against a team that, while is probably better than people thought, I don't think is as good as they looked to be. It's my thoughts. Hopefully, next week we fix some things and play better, because oh lordy, was that depressing. Because it's different for everyone, please also do the trivial, common, robot friendly. How do you leave fish, and what the tanks are like when you return? I guess my problem is, like, I'm in the middle of a series and it would be breaking up some of that, but maybe I'll see. We'll see how my timing is looking as I'm trying to get all the things finished at the last second. Andrew, last night I realized my 5 autosynchronous catfish are alive. Okay, I thought I'd killed 4 of the 5. They were hiding for the last 6 months. School of 5 came out to eat new algae pellet. They're really good at hiding until they're like super, super comfortable, and usually that means ultra dense plant growth. They can be really adept at hiding for long periods of time, and they're still getting food. They'll find their food. You know, like a lot of other catfish, they're kind of nocturnal, but once they're super comfortable and they feel like they're hiding in plain sight, so to speak, you'll see them out and about a lot more. That's what happens in most of my tanks. I see my autocycluses quite a bit, but that's because I have super dense plant growth and they kind of think they're hidden everywhere, even when they're not hidden. But it's nice because you can tell they're just taking it easy. Bobby Ward, my rainbows were chewing on my angel fins, so I moved the angels to another tank. Kind of a bummer, live and learn. Wow, that's surprising. Like, I guess I would say, what species of rainbow are you keeping in that tank, Bobby? In my experience, I usually have like larger adult angels, and I've never seen that problem because the angels are much better at being kind of the like, this is my territory, back off fish than rainbow fish are. But if you had, like, say, smaller rainbow or smaller angels and bigger rainbow fish, I could see where the rainbows could kind of bully. They're usually not fin nippers, so that's where I'm really surprised. Although they're kind of dumb and will try to taste almost anything, so there's that. Maybe it's just in any time I've mixed an angel, because I've mixed a couple angels in my like retirement tank. Those angels are typically like big adults and frequently dominant males, so they're very good at like setting a boundary and kind of finding a place they want to lock down and guard. And then the rainbows are everywhere else in the tank. Hold on. Chat jumped. Jonathan Perez Miguel, what's your morning routine when it comes to your tanks? Thanks in advance. Pretty simple, actually. So I have a number of different tanks. I typically in the morning actually don't do that much. Because I have with my current work, I have a lot of people that are all throughout the East Coast, and I'm on the West Coast. So their day starts significantly earlier than mine, which means that I typically am a little more rushed in the morning. And what I do is I shift my routine toward lunch because I happen to be fortunate and work from home. When I did not work from home and I needed to go into work, all my stuff was done in the morning. So I'll explain it in that regard. It's basically the same routine. I've just shifted it to a different part of my day. I fertilize most of my planet tanks almost every day. And this, you'll learn about this in my plant talk that'll be coming out on my channel after I do it at the Keystone Clash, but I've talked about it before several times. I try to spread my dosage of fertilizer over every day of the week, roughly speaking. I typically miss a day or two just because I'm in a rush, but that's natural, right? People do things. So if I'm, say, like in a 40-gallon breeder, right, and I'm dosing, like Easy Green over here, right? When I'm in a CO2 tank at medium or higher light, I would normally dose twice a week per the recommended, and it would be 4 pumps each time. Instead, what I would do is a single pump every day, and then usually the day after a water change, I would do 2 pumps. As an example. Now, if I have CO2, that might be like 2 pumps a day, because they actually can use quite a lot more nutrients than just having the higher light. It sort of depends. Each of my tanks is different. I have a routine and I kind of know what I'm doing as far as my fertilizer is concerned. But I fertilize almost every day before I feed. I run around and I shoot fertilizer in the tanks really fast in whatever room I'm in, and then I grab my food. Um, Most days I'm feeding a custom blended mixture of flake food, but for the most part, it is usually just Extremes Community Crave, sometimes with some other stuff mixed into it. But I like a blend of a heavy protein food and spirulina, so more veg oriented food, because it just helps make sure I'm less likely to encounter things like constipation or any kind of like plugging up of my fish's digestive systems because they're on a processed food, right? I'll go around, I feed a little bit in each tank just based on number of fish. I don't measure stuff. I do it by hand, kind of by eyeball, but I've just gotten used to, I can feed this much in each tank, and that's good. And then usually I will also feed every other day. I will add in like a tab type food for like my Phlocostomuses and some other stuff depending on those tanks. That's each tank, and it's just based on if there's 2 plecos in this tank, I throw in some tabs. If there's 4 plecos in that tank, I throw in more tabs. If it's just my like breeding tank of my which breeding should be a loose term because right now I'm not trying to actively breed them, and my males are really bad at kicking their eggs out of the cave. But like my Wabenmooster plecos, they get fed almost every day, not exactly every day. And sometimes I'll mix the food up. So if I happen to have a batch of Rapashi made as an example, I'll put Rapashi in the tank instead of the sinking wafer tabs that I normally use. At least once per week, I feed frozen food. And eventually I need to get back to doing live baby brine more regularly, and then I'll be feeding baby brine almost every day. Other than that, my maintenance is really simple. It's a weekly water change. Very frequently in my systems, it's actually more of a weekly top off and not a full out water change. But I do kind of rotate through and do actual water changes on most of my tanks. There's maybe only like one tank that doesn't regularly see a true and full water change. But that tank is hyper heavily planted and has a very, very light bioload in it. It has like 3 plecos and 2 rainbow fish and a 40-gallon breeder, and it's literally just jammed to the gills full of Java fern and Bulbitis. So it really doesn't necessarily need a water change. It just needs to be topped off for evaporation. Also, there's almost no mineral content to my water, so very rarely is adding water adding more and more hardness. So that makes it kind of easy. But that's my typical like regime, if that makes sense, my daily regime. And I've got basically 3 places in my house where tanks sit, 3 different rooms. I just do the same routine in each room, call it a day, and we're done until the next day. Hope that helps. Other than like your filter maintenance and stuff, but that's all mostly by eyeball. So as an example, it'd be like, as I start to see flow issues or something else that I know is an indication like it is time to clean, I clean. There are certain things that like get more frequent cleaning. So an example would be the pre-filter sponges in my Awaze filters. They typically go about every 2 weeks because I moved from the 60 PPI to 40 to make them a little more coarse, and then I have an intake sponge on it as well, and it just makes it easy. I have other filters that typically get serviced about once a month, and it's just I literally just eyeball the flow rate. As I start seeing the flow dip down, then I know it's time to clean it up. It works pretty well for me. I'm sure I could probably do something significantly better, but I want to do that like in automation eventually. Nabokov fan, second question, are you allowed theoretically to bring giveaway stuff like plants for your talk? Maybe trivia or someone who wants to ask a question get some plants. So yes, I could in theory give stuff away. The difficult part about giving plants away is just transporting them. checking like bags of plants and things like that is a little rough. So it kind of runs into that kind of problem. Forgive me. That time of year where the weather's starting to change messes with my nostrils. Um, I was originally planning on, similar to how I did like the towels for Fishtoberfest and I did the hats at Triple Crown. I was originally planning to do like some kind of custom giveaway merch, but when I lost my job and then my dog needed a really expensive surgery, that spare money went right out the window. So I unfortunately don't have something. I'm trying to do something at least for the people who also like sponsored me going to the Keystone Clash, and I have a small list of people from the Keystone Clash organizer, from people that did on top of just like what Keystone Clash does, but their extra kind of volunteer sponsorship to get speakers out there. I'm trying to figure out something kind of quickly now that I'm back to normal that I can do for those folks. I kind of wanted to figure out something to have, but the problem is I'm just running so short on time. The unfortunate part of life. Legion Aquatics. In my guppy tank, all my crypts, Java Fern, and Dwarf Sag are growing really quick, but my Hygrophila and Rotalas are growing slow. What could be the reason? And I think it's not enough fertilizer, but it's funny because I have a tank set up to the same full of hornwort, and I never dose. The nitrates are 0 all the time, but it grows so fast. Well, I mean, the nitrates might sit as effectively undetectable because it's just consuming everything so fast. The problem you might run into is depending on the amount of light you're putting. So, like, Hygrophilas and Rotalas especially, like higher amounts of light. Whereas, like, your Crypts, your Java Ferns, and your Dwarf Sag top out at about medium light at best. They don't really want high light, and that's where you start running into problems with them. So it could be a combination of fertilizer and light, where the light's not quite bright enough to make it consume as much as it could possibly consume, or it's fighting so many other plants that are doing really, really well that it's not getting quite enough of the nitrates it wants. Keep in mind, Rotalas and Hygrophilas both are nitrate hogs. They love tons of nitrates. So if you're not like, that would be the case where I would say if you're testing your tank regularly and you're only in that like 5 to 10 ppm, you're not enough to make those also be very happy. If you're in that like more 20 to 40 range, you're good. 10 to 20 probably should still be okay. Kind of depends. But yeah, hopefully that part helps. It's there's so many like weird things when you're mixing plants about what's going to make them happy or piss them off, and often it comes down to kind of time and making the mistakes, and then you learn from those mistakes and figure out how to do it right, or at least in my case, that's how it's been. I have made plenty of mistakes, let me tell you. Sid Miller, do you think I can breed Pseudomagil or Madakas in a tank with shrimp? Yes. I've got Neos and Ghost Shrimp in both tanks. So, Neos are your best bet. It's actually widely known in the rainbow fish community that red cherry shrimp especially are very good about keeping fungus off of rainbow fish eggs, but not damaging the eggs themselves. So I know a couple of different rainbow fish keepers that actually will put cherry shrimp in with their mops of eggs to prevent them from getting fungus on them and keep them clean. And then as the rainbows hatch, they can actually feed slightly heavier and know that the shrimp will basically play cleanup crew for all the excess food that the rainbows don't eat, instead of having it build up at the bottom of the tank potentially and maybe be a risk. Usually you're not feeding so much food that that's actually a problem. But there's another example kind of similar to that, in that Eric Bodrock, well-known rainbow fish and catfish breeder, will keep baby rainbows and baby Corydoras together because any of the excess food the rainbows don't eat falls down to the bottom and the Corydoras will clean up. So when you'll see at a lot of his like raising tanks, you'll see Corys and rainbows together, and they kind of just help sustain each other as they grow up. Now the rainbows grow much slower, mind you, than the corridoras do, but it's a really good kind of, I don't want to say symbiosis, but it's just like cohabitation works really well, and shrimp can do the same thing. I would avoid ghost shrimp and definitely avoid snails because snails will just eat the eggs like crazy. But it is my experience, both with some of my friends and a number of different people that I trust on the interwebs, that having cherry shrimp especially, but mostly Neocaridina, in with baby rainbow fish and rainbow fish eggs is a positive and not a negative. Something worth trying out, for certain. For certain. And I would think you could have similar with the Madakas, because they're a similar type fish in the grand scheme of things, like as far as size, eggs, all that kind of stuff. I would think you could do the same thing with Madakas. Kelly Foreman. For a second, I thought Bentley got pet birds. You got my hopes up and dashed them with football, boo. I've had birds in the past. I've had a number of birds in the past. At one point, I had 4 cockatiels, a Quaker parakeet, and about 20 regular parakeets. I used to keep a lot of birds, actually, as a kid. And my fun story, my first... let's say my first and most special pet that I ever had as a child, on my 6th birthday, I was given my first cockatiel. It was a cinnamon cockatiel named Lucky. I named him Lucky because I felt very lucky to get him. Now, he was already an adult, but probably a young adult, maybe 1 to 2 years old. I had that bird for almost 20 years. I think I was 24, so about 18 years when he finally passed, and it devastated me. Absolutely devastated me. My most recent pair of cockatiels I had, my mom had adopted because it was this kind of sad story at the time, local pet store, which is Denny's Pet World. I've talked many times about how I love that place. This is a place I grew up with. They're still around in Kirkland, Washington. But basically, these 2 brothers, one was named 2T, as in the number 2 and a T, and the other, I can't remember the other boy's name off the top of my head. I want to say Horace, but Horace was a different bird that we had before then, back when I had Lucky. Anyway, I've had a number of cockatiels over time. These 2 boys, their human parents, right, were cockatiel breeders, and these were some of the birds that they had kept out of a batch because the husband loved them so much. These 2 boys, and unfortunately, her husband passed away. I think it was cancer, and the husband's nickname was Boomer, and both of the boys, in cockatiel speak, and those who've had cockatiels before know they can whistle words pretty well, but it's not quite as succinct as like your parrots and like, African grays and some of your bigger, smarter birds. But if you're used to cockatiels, you understand kind of like cockatiel talk and how they pronounce human words and tones. But basically, they made their tone that was Boomer, his nickname, and they did it so regularly this poor gal could not keep them because she would just go into crying fits. And understandable. They'd been together something like 35 years, and so she went to Denny's Pet World and asked that the caveat be the only way they can be adopted is they must stay together, and they came with like their enclosure and all these things. My mom's a big sucker for sad stories and loved cockatiels, so we adopted them at one point. And those 2 is so hilarious. Tutti would sit here on my shoulder, while his brother would sit here on my chest and preen through my goatee. And apparently this is also a behavior we found out that they did with Boomer, right? It just he had a bigger beard than I do because I can't grow facial hair very long. It doesn't look good. It looks horrible, so I always keep mine short. But needless to say, one would supervise, and occasionally, like if I had a necklace or something, I would pick at it, which is a very cockatiel thing to do, and the other would sit and preen through my facial hair constantly. But they were both very, very good boys. And when we were going through like the whole move and stuff, where my mom, when I moved into this house here, my mom had to move in with me for a while. My now ex, but my girlfriend at the time, her mom was a big cockatiel lover, used to breed them, had volunteered to take them because we're moving into a much smaller place, and there was going to be these two birds with not really a good place to put them compared to my house I grew up in, and 6 cats. So they were going to almost never get time out of the cage. And I just felt like it would be better because they were going to a home with no cats, no dogs. They were going to be the only pets and have a dedicated human who really loves cockatiels. And they're still, last I checked, they're still alive and quite well down in Oregon. So that's my last set of birds. Had them for a while. Really long story for you, Kelly, but there you go. I've had lots of birds in my life, and with having fish now all over the place in my house, I would not get birds again, just because birds are kind of messy. I love them to death. I do love birds, but I don't want them throwing stuff into fish tanks. It's really what it comes down to. And any room where I would keep a pet, I either have corgis or I've got fish. Possibly both. And, yeah. Amazon pancakes. Bentley, how do you get rid of the nervousness in front of that many people? Great question. So, the first thing that I would suggest to anyone, if you're ever going to publicly speak, is understand that everyone, no matter how often they speak in the public, no matter how big the crowds they've spoken in front of are, everyone is always nervous. Always. I'm kind of fortunate, so I've done a lot of public speaking for like youth groups and other organizations all the way through like my earlier teens and things like that. So I'm relatively experienced. I'm actually like a multiple time state champion public speaker. A weird clout thing, but yes, this is actually true. But every time I am a little nervous. And the only thing is, as I have done this more, I found a way to turn that nervousness into excitement. And the more that I think about it, instead of being like butterflies in my stomach because I'm nervous I'm going to like screw up or say something stupid, I turn it into excitement because I'm excited to be able to see like how the crowd reacts, and do people find the dumb things that I think are funny. Like I was, when I did the one about dojo, which is at the Fishtoberfest last year, right? Which is on my channel. Feel free to watch it. It's how I fell in love with a fish that farts. I think it's funny. But, there were several times where like I intentionally delivered my facts and the things I was talking about with a kind of a like sarcastic, satirical delivery, right? And that was on purpose because I cannot help but find silly things even in like the facts of dojo loaches just because they're such funny fish. And I found that like the more I played into some of those things, the more that I'd hear laughs, and people in the crowd would engage or be shocked at some of like the random facts that maybe they don't know that you do know. And like these things are the ways that make it easier. You're going to be nervous for the first few minutes, but then if you can find a way to make that more about being excited, those first few minutes are like the tough part, right? Because you might be sweating, you might be shaking in the legs a little, but if you understand that anybody who's talking, even the most seasoned speaker, is going through that, and then you get into a groove naturally. You're going through your talk, you're doing your thing. You might have it as a little more informal where people can just ask questions whenever they want, versus maybe you want something very formal and structured. It all depends on you. Do the things that are comfortable for you. But just know that like any speaker, whether they do this all the time, whether they're on YouTube, whatever the heck it may be, we are always nervous. in public, in person, you're always going to be some semblance of nervous. It's just about finding a way to turn it instead of being worried about the negative and to be excited for the positives. And as soon as you kind of like make that mental switch in your head, that first minute is just nerves more so about like that, like, I can't wait to get going. And then once you start getting into the flow of things, it's just smooth sailing. It's easy. Because even if you make mistakes, like, just have a laugh about it and people will laugh with you, right? We're all human. We all screw up, right? We all screw up in one way, shape, or form. And it helps people relate to you more. Because if you're not like this perfect robotic thing, people realize like, oh, this is going to be way more fun, and they're engaged, and they'll engage. And when they engage with you, it's easier to be having fun, be relaxed, crack a joke here and there, whatever it may be. But yeah, every time I get up to speak in front of people, I'm nervous too, dude. I just try to picture it nowadays, especially as I've turned that nervousness into excitement. It's that more like anxious, raring to go kind of energy instead of the like, oh my God, what am I about to do? Right? It's like, man, I can't wait to go through this. I can't wait to see how people react. I hope people have fun. I can't wait to see what kind of questions I get. It's turning it from that negative to positive. And I think that makes it so much easier to get through it if you can do that. Some people struggle to do that. Do not get me wrong. I'm very fortunate that my brain can just like click and go positive really, really fast. I'm lucky. But trust me, you'll do well. Don't be afraid. Make it fun. Zen Ginger, Bentley, I live in Houston. It could always be worse than the Texans could be your team. Yeah. Hey, man, I mean, look at it this way. The Seahawks through, like, the late 80s, early 90s, and even, like, the start of when we had Hasselbeck in the very early thousands were garbage. We were an abysmally bad team every year. Just every year. Even when we had great players, we were bad. So I can think of, like, I've lived through at least 15 years of the Seahawks being just hot garbage. So it has been very nice that we have been competitive for a long period of time, at least a decade now. But it really sucks when you have a lot of hope going into the start of the season. Your first game is like, we were supposed to win that game in the opposite score. It was supposed to be like 30-13 us, not 30-13 them, and us just feeling like we're getting trounced. But yeah, that's football. I mean, some of the best teams in the NFL lost over the weekend. And it could be worse. We could have been the Giants. The poor Giants got absolutely pummeled by the Cowboys. That looked bad. That looked real bad. Coro works. Can you do a joke segment where you laugh at the shrimp keepers for not having their own competition like the snails do at the Clash? Part of that is because of the people who are helping run those things, but it might be a fun, like, part of a video for certain. I might have to poke some fun at, like, the Lucas Bretz type people in the world who are really good at shrimp. Kingfisher's guys, given a chance, would you go collecting in Papua, the east side of the island? So the safe side of the island is what you just said. I mean, if I were in significantly better physical shape, it would certainly be interesting. To be honest, wild collecting is not quite as interesting to me. And part of that, while I love nature and I love my rainbow fish, right? I get more interested by seeing the process of things. And part of that plays into my technical background, right? Like, I'm a very technical person. I care a lot about, like, the details and the crunch of things. So for me, let's say, like, I had an infinite amount of budget to go on a fish-oriented vacation, I would go to Japan and want to go to all the koi farms. I would want to see how each of the different koi farms do their thing and understand why they have focused on the specific breeds of koi they focus on. Part of that is because, like, as a kid, I loved koi with my dad, and I still love koi. I just don't have the ability to keep them the way I'd want to keep them, which is, say, a big pond, and putting in a pond in my house is way more expensive than I can afford. Let's be honest here. But it would be really fun to be able to go to some of those big farms and those world-renowned breeders in Japan and be able to just see what they do, how they do things, and kind of just learn from the masters of koi keeping, right? Because that's a little more interesting to me, that like little bits of process and those little fundamental things of knowledge, than necessarily going into the wild and collecting fish. And that should tell you, like, this is why I love fishing in an aquarium. There's process, there's things, and fun, like natural water chemistry, sciencey type stuff that really interests me. And I'm sure, like, Kelly, who is like the true scientist in the room, is probably like, the real science is in the wild, dummy. But that's just the way my brain works. If I was going to do anything and I could do one trip, it would be that, as opposed to rainbow fish, no matter how much I love rainbows. Although it would be very fun, although it's in it's a really remote location. I would love to be able to go to the Pasco River that is in Australia, because there's a trifasciata species that exists in the Pasco River in Australia, and catch the Pasco River trifasciata. That would be more interesting to me, just from the sake of it's the same as my last name and kind of makes it special in that way for me, than going to Papua. Gary can have Papua. He's got that down pat. I do things for dumb reasons. Oh, okay. Probably can do one last question, because we're very close to things. Oh, this is a good one. Okay, two things for Luis Carlos Herrera Marroquin. Are SBI Resbora and apple snails shrimp safe? SBI Resbora, probably. They're pretty small. I'm not sure about apple snails. They can get kind of big, but in theory, I don't see them like ambushing your snails. Or not your snails, but your shrimp. There's been some talk about like the risks of assassin snails with shrimp, but I think assassin snails don't eat fast enough to actually keep up with them. Mickey M, use the classic tip to pretend the audience is naked. But then how are you going to concentrate if that's the case? I've never found that, like, pretend the audience is in their underwear or whatever, like some other embarrassing thing. I think it's more about, like, just finding a way to understand that, like, everybody's going to be nervous, so it's not just you. And then finding a way to, like, find those positive energies instead. And you'll be fine. You'll be fine. Okay, the other question from Luis that I think is interesting. Is it true that when we do water changes, we renew the minerals which fish consume? So not necessarily fish consuming them. What tends to happen is that the most common thing that occurs is that as the nitrogen cycle naturally happens, so as your beneficial bacteria turn ammonia into nitrite into nitrate, what that does is it slowly consumes little bits of your carbonate hardness, your KH. And KH is what keeps your pH stable. Okay? So if you don't do water changes over time, too much of your carbonate hardness will get consumed and you risk a crash. So what really happens is that water changes just refreshing minerals, yes, and there's some amount of minerals that get consumed, but it's more like your plants that are going to consume things than necessarily your fish. Your fish tend to absorb minerals through food. But there is like an osmotic response where if there's not enough minerals in the water can actually attack the fish and try to get mineral content out of the fish. And this sounds kind of crazy, but it typically is a way that you'll see problems in their slime coat when this kind of stuff happens. Now, For those who have lots and lots of KH, you could probably do water changes less frequently. And most of the time when we're doing a water change, what we're actually trying to do is remove any of the potential harmful stuff, usually nitrate, because in high concentration, nitrates are scary, right? So if you remove those excess nitrates and then you dilute it back down with fresh, clean water that doesn't have those things, then you're also usually rebuffering some amount of carbon hardness or maybe other mineral content that is helpful and diluting out the things that are your problem solid dissolved solids in your water, if that makes sense. Not necessarily purely a mineral content refresh thing, but sometimes it can be. Kelly Foreman has a KH and GH of 22 plus in Iowa. Yeah, well, you're in liquid rock. Congratulations. It is great if you want to keep all the African cichlids in the world. Not so great for certain plants. Not so great. All right. All right. Make sure I'm not missing anything. Lady Diane, how you doing? Good to see you. Sure you've been here more, but oh yeah, what Gary is back yet. It's getting there. It's getting there. All right, gang. We are at the time. So with that being said, I will do one more live stream next week, right before the Clash. So be here for that. Again, we'll have more in the like positive and negative filter series, saga, whatever you want to call it. That's going to be coming through the next couple of videos that are coming up. And then we'll probably get into some extra stuff from Keystone Clash. So with that being said, guys, thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, stay awesome. Have a good one, everybody.